the studios in Hollywood are haunted.
It's an area of the ship that's believed to be the most haunted on board the Queen Mary.
All I can say is it felt like wind blowing through.
Death, quite simply, is the opposite of life.
As long as he's in that crypt there, his remains, people are going to come.
The power of a cemetery and life and death.
Life's but a walking shadow, Shakespeare's Macbeth tells us. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. But is this true? Do we leave this earth forever? Or do some of us stay around to contradict Macbeth by being heard again, and sometimes seen?
All the studios in Hollywood are haunted. There's no question. Every studio from Warner Brothers to Paramount to MGM Studios, which is now Sony Studios, and many others, almost every single one has a story. Why? It's very simple. These studios, since they were built, and many were built in the mid-teens here in Los Angeles, that's really when the boom of studio building was on, and all the way till this very day, we're talking many, many decades of thousands and thousands of people coming to the studios to work. People have been born and people have died at the studios. So there's no question that if someone had died at a studio, particularly in the numbers that have died at studios, there have got to be ghosts there. And of course that leads me to the stories of many of the ghosts that of course still inhabit these studios. So here we are at Raleigh Studios on Stage 5, supposedly one of the most haunted stages in Hollywood. Of course, the reason for this is that in the 1930s, there happened to have been a fatality on the stage by a lighting man up here up in the upper grip area, which is quite high, as you can see, and apparently he fell and was killed here. Now, this happens at all the studios over all the years of the studio's history. But in this particular stage, there has been a folklore of a haunting here that still continues to this day. Heard the old stories of hauntings, and did you experience any of these kind of things?
I've heard stories, and I experienced one about 10 years ago when I was on Stage 2 here at Raleigh, locking up the stage one night, and all I can say is it felt like wind blowing through me, or a person physically walked through my body. There was nobody there, the doors were closed, there was no wind, but that's the only way I can describe it, is a force passing right through my body. And once a grip fell off a scaffolding about 20-something feet in the air, and instead of being hurt, he said it felt like something caught him and gently laid him to the ground, and he got up uninjured. And the whole crew, I was there when it happened, we all ran over to him, and he got up and said, "No, something caught me. I'm okay."
This is the behind Stage 5, and this is the original corridor here, which was built in the early 20s, about 1926. And as you can see here, there are these doorways that go into this building, which is here, which was where the dressing rooms and the offices where the writers were. So the actors would come right out and actually go right in here into their dressing rooms. And this is where Mary Pickford worked, and Douglas Fairbanks, and many others around World War I. And of course, in these corridors here, which date back to the 20s, there have been sightings of a lady wearing a gown, sort of walking through here late at night, which was transparent and disappeared into the wall. Here we are at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. It was known as Hollywood Memorial Cemetery for practically 100 years. And this is one of the oldest cemeteries in Los Angeles, and it is the oldest cemetery in Hollywood. And this is quite an important cemetery here, because this is where many a Hollywood celebrity of the past years in the film, TV, radio, and recording industry are buried. And right next door, right over here on my left here, is the window and wall of Paramount Studios. And Paramount Studios was built on the site of the Hollywood Memorial Cemetery property. We believe that a lot of film people who are buried here are still visiting their old studio, particularly Cecil B. DeMille, Rudolph Valentino, and Douglas Fairbanks, who are all Paramount stars. There was one wonderful story that was told to me by a property man. He had placed certain furniture upstairs right up here in this prop department. You know, they placed them in a particular place corresponding to a particular number. And every time they would come back the next morning, not only would all the pieces of furniture, like, you know, chairs and everything, be placed in the middle of the room instead of in their spaces, he thought that something was going on, like somebody was playing a practical joke, right? So this went on, though, for a while, and he was getting exasperated. He was getting tired of moving all this furniture back under their proper numbers. And he checked with all of his employees. Nobody was moving it. And they all promised him there was no practical jokes being done. So two of them sat there all night waiting, and they were awakened by scraping sounds. So they went and peeked around and looked. You know, there was a work light on there so they could see. And to their shock and amazement, the furniture was moving on its own, moving out of its space into the middle of the room, all converging in one place. And the next question would be, well, did this continue? Well, you know what? It continued for a little while longer, and then it abruptly stopped, and it never happened again.
One studio in particular has a reputation for hauntings that rivals all others.
And this studio, which is located in Culver City, was built in 1917 by a man named Thomas H. Ince. And Mr. Ince had died on Hearst's yacht. Basically, the studio after Ince's death was taken over by Cecil B. DeMille and a countless other host of corporate names, like, for example, RKO and Pathé, and David O. Selznick had taken it over also. So this particular studio has a long history of ghosts because of the many deaths that have happened there, too. This is the studio of King Kong and Citizen Kane. It's a great old historical Hollywood studio. But one of the stories is that a friend of mine who was a special effects carpenter, he remembers being on some of the old stages that were built in the 20s there, and that he was on a corridor walking during the day, mind you, and all of a sudden he felt a feeling that somebody walked right through him. He also witnessed one time, another time he was there many years later when he was already semi-retired, when he actually saw an apparition of a man wearing a fedora hat and jacket and tie go into an office right through the door. There have been strange reports, particularly from some private homes. One of them, the Elkie Summer of Joe Hyams' home. This was in the 1960s, and which their house, which they purchased in the Coldwater Canyon area of sort of LA County, Beverly Hills. The experience was that they had some creepy fires happening in their attic. It was such a dangerous thing that Joe Hyams decided to bring in people, experts, to check on this. They came in and looked everything over and said, there's nothing here to start a fire. Well, it got to be so bad that the house almost burned.